Joining us in studio, I like to call him it's the worst title he's ever received. Chris and Joe Show Ombudsman, Pat McMahon joining us. Pat?
Yes, I have no idea whether the mic is on or not. Do they take care of that for me?
I hear you loud and clear.
No, because before, when I used to be here, those 32 years,
It's one of my responsibilities
they
in the
just
building.
used to come in with a beer can and a wire that went outside.
Uh-huh.
Hey, listen, guys, I am so happy to be here for a number of reasons. I wanted to tell you the story out of the news that I mentioned to you on the phone, but I also wanted to tell you what a thrill it is to be a part of the law firm of Huizenga, Goldstein, and McMahon.
World class.
Doesn't that sound like something?
That's America, Pat. That's America, right?
It's almost sweet. But then again, that's another law firm. I also want to take just 20 seconds to say that since you talk about brackets so often, okay, I have one addition, and that is simply my Cinderella team is Drake. Not just because I happen to go to high school in Des Moines, but because that's Al McCoy's alma mater.
Yes.
And anytime I get a chance to say anything with Al McCoy in the sentence, I take advantage of it. Thank you.
They're taking on Mizzou in the tournament.
When I happened to mention this to management, it was about a show that I did many years ago, one of the Pat McMahon programs here at KTAR that still is a shock to look back on, and in a way quite unexplainable, because while as long as I'm dropping names, I crossed paths with President Kennedy, then Senator Kennedy, because I went out to Sky Harbor to meet the plane, and he was a senator, but he was also a presidential candidate. Four people from media there. And the fellow from the Arizona Republic walked over as this presidential candidate that looked like a matinee idol walked down the steps. And I thought, wait a minute, we've had nothing but geezers all this time. And look at this guy. He was gorgeous.
Something else.
And he hits the tarmac. And the Republic guy, of course, immediately elbows his way through. And he said, hello, I'm so-and-so from the Arizona Republic. And Kennedy said, I've heard of you. Next. And I should tell the audience now that in those days, the Republic was a real conservative, right-wing Republican political vehicle, shall we say.
So I'll set this up for everybody here. Obviously, KTAR and Arizona legend Pat McMahon joins Steve Goldstein, who's in for Chris and myself, Joe Huizenga, right now. The boss reached out to me yesterday morning, and she said that that you, Pat, had a very interesting connection to JFK, the JFK files. Obviously, these 80,000 pages, some 64,000 released, were going to be dropped on us here. And she said, you might want to talk with Pat. She said, Pat has talked with, I believe she said, the then Texas governor twice.
Governor Connally, not when he was on the air, not when he was on the air with me. Many years after that, and many years after the assassination, many years after his governorship.
So what did Governor Connally say to you?
Well, he had a book out, don't they all? And he was promoting the book. That's why he was doing talk shows. And so we chatted for a moment about the content of the book. And then I said, fine, we'll get back to that, please, if we will. And we're going to sell a couple of books here. I promise you, Governor Connally. But I, on behalf of the audience, I have to ask you about that day when you were the other person in the car in which the
November
president of the United
22nd
States
of 63
was assassinated. And I said, and you were not only the other person, a passenger in the car, along with the first lady and the driver, but I said, you also were seriously wounded. And he was in critical condition in the hospital for some time. The bullet went through his back and then out his leg, or out his arm and into his leg. And there's that single bullet theory that people have questioned for a long time. But I said, please tell me about the way you have felt simply about the continuing suspicions and the continuing conspiracy talk. You were there. You were the other guy that was seriously injured. And he said, well, I don't mind telling you, I haven't spread it around a great deal because I didn't want to be part of that. But he said, I know that there was another gunman on the grassy knoll.
Huh.
Well, no, I sat there, my producer, Rosemary, who's still a producer for me, on the other side of the glass, whiplash. And of course, the board operator wasn't paying any attention at all.
Look at him right now. He's not paying any attention either. He's like, March Madness music, huh? What? I'll have some jazz for him.
No, but I know there was a second gunman on the infamous Grassy Knoll. And I said, well, please, if you'll pursue that. He said, I saw the explosion from the barrel of the gun. And he said, the impact hit me, and I was out of it immediately. But I saw it.
Okay.
And now, that's only the first half of the story.
The second half?
Because the really interesting part of the story comes up now when I responded. I said, well, have you revealed this to a number of people? He said, I've really tried to keep it under wraps. I don't want this to be my lifetime career. Comes back 2 years later, he's got another book.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years later, he's got another book. That's why he's on the show.
Uh-huh.
And I said, before we go any further, welcome back to KTAR. Delighted to talk to you about the new book and the content therein. But first, when you were here the last time, and you told me about the second gunman on the grassy knoll and how you knew that while you did not know who besides Lee Harvey Oswald, you knew there was at least one other gunman.
Yeah.
And his reaction, fellas, was this, live on KTAR. You must be mistaken, Pat. I never said that.
Oh, Pat.
And we didn't tape shows most of the time, so we had no actual physical record of that show, and it wouldn't have been because it would have been years later.
But you know what you heard.
Well, no, and so did Rosemary, who got whiplash again on the other side of the glass. And I said, okay, I certainly don't mean to in any way impinge on your dignity or mine, because I wouldn't make up something like that. He said, no, I don't think you made it up. He said, I just think your memory's faulty, and that I certainly would have known if I had had that experience, and I didn't. Next, what are we going to talk about now, Pat?
Time to talk about my book now.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a shock. It was disappointing to me, and he said the Warren Commission got it right. He did say that, and the Warren Commission may possibly have spoken to him about. I don't think that probably my talk show was the only appearance that he
had mentioned that he
had said
believed there was a
about
second gunman.
The other gunman, the second gunman, but someone sadly got to him. I'm not a conspiracy guy. The assassination itself was enough of a shock, but I'll never forget it.
So,
and people that were listening who are still alive, and remember that. I was disappointed that he gave in to whomever it is that those forces were. And I wonder now if we'll find out anything from the release of the papers.
KTAR and Arizona legend Pat McMahon with us, Chris and Joe show here on KTAR. One or two more quick ones for you, Pat. You mentioned November 22nd, 1963, a historic day in our country. Governor Connally was in that car, but you were certainly around when this happened. You said you're not a believer in conspiracy theories, but Connally told you once there was a second gunman, then tells you later, no, the Warren Commission got it right. What do you remember from that day? What was the news reporting, and what do you truly believe?
Well, I certainly believe there are conspiracies, and there are forces that, for whatever reason, sometimes power, sometimes money, want to keep things under wraps, particularly when you're talking about something like this. But why? Why would there have been that person in the school depository, that person, Lee Harvey Oswald, not the most skilled marksman. We all got a marksman thing when we were in the Army. I got that just because I knew where the trigger was. But to be that skilled, and then to have had the history at the embassies in different parts of the world, and it was always very peculiar. But when he was shot by Jack Ruby, and when Jack Ruby was allowed into that sacrosanct area where we're talking about getting a guy out of a cell who has been accused of killing
A president.
the President of the United States and a policeman during that day when people were looking for him. It just always seemed a little too pat, if you'll pardon me. But so too, and maybe we can talk about it if more information is going to be made available about the Bobby Kennedy assassination. Really? A waiter? Sirhan, and why? And what about the people that were questioned that night? Yeah, sometimes things seem to be a little too peculiar to neglect. I hope that people continue to pursue an investigation, and I hope there's no added guilty figure.
Pat McMahon, KTAR and Arizona legend, thank you so much for coming in with us and truly blessing us with your presence and your memories from that day and your interactions with Governor Connally. What a shock to the system.
Well, let's not forget that law firm.
Of course, Huizenga. I don't know why you listed me first.
Because it's your show, Joe.
Then was it Goldstein and McMahon, or was it McMahon and Goldstein?
Well, let's talk about that a little later, depending on the money. And,
Well, Pat, my mom's an O'Brien, so we could mix her in too. So.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe, and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.